Hi, I'm Janice Switlo, and today I'm going to take you down some history that you may not be familiar with regarding Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald. I'm quoting from Chronicles of Canada in 32 volumes, volume 29, The Day of Sir John Macdonald by Sir Joseph Pope. And note that this author actually refers to his personal discussions with Sir John A. Macdonald. So he comes from a reputable perspective in terms of how does he know this, or how did he know those things, apart from what was on the record at the time. So this is interesting. His father, Hugh Macdonald, was originally from Glasgow, and that's where John Alexander Macdonald was born on January 11, 1815. Now his father formed a partnership with another man, and they embarked in business as a cotton manufacturer, engaging in the manufacture of bandanas. And the style of the firm became H. Macdonald and Co. The venture did not prove successful. Now, I want you to think about this, how fashion led to perhaps the foundation of serious issues for Canadians and Indigenous nationals, because had the manufacture of bandanas been successful, had there been more people buying bandanas in Glasgow and that part of the world, then Johnny Macdonald may not have ever arrived in the New World. The venture did not prove successful, and Macdonald resolved to try his fortunes in the New World. Accordingly, in the year 1820, he embarked for Canada and ended up in the town of Kingston, then and for some years after, the most considerable town in Upper Canada, boasting a population of about 2,500 souls. Interesting choice of word. I'm wondering if Indigenous nationals were residing in the area. Anyway, I digress. In the early 20s of the 19th century, the infant province of Upper Canada found itself slowly recovering from the effects of the War of 1812 to 14. The Lieutenant Governor, together with the Executive and Legislative Councils, was largely under the influence of the family compact of those days. The oligarchical and selfish rule of this coterie gave rise to much dissatisfaction among the people, whose discontent, assiduously fanned by agitators, culminated in open rebellion in the succeeding decade. Such was the condition of things prevailing at the time when the future Prime Minister arrived in the town with which he was destined to be in close association for nearly 3/4 of a century. So his father, after a few years of unsatisfactory experience in Kingston, decided to move further west, and he set up shop in Bay of Quinte in the township of Adolphston, which had been settled about 40 years earlier, previously by a party of United Empire Loyalists under the command of a Captain Van Alstyne. Here at Hay Bay, Macdonald opened a shop. Subsequently, he moved across the bay to a place in the county of Prince Edward, then known as the Stone Mills and afterwards as Glenora, where he built a grist mill. This undertaking, however, did not prosper, and in 1836 he returned to Kingston, where he obtained a post in the commercial bank. Shortly afterwards, he fell into ill health, and in 1841 he died. So Johnny Macdonald's father, Hugh, did not have any success in his efforts to gain his fortune in the New World. So when Hugh Macdonald, his father, moved from Hay Bay to the Stone Mills, his son John, then about 10 years old, returned to Kingston to pursue his studies. He attended the grammar school in that town until he reached the age of 15, when he began the world for himself. 5 years at a grammar school was all the formal education Sir John Macdonald ever enjoyed. He always regretted the disadvantages of his early life. Quote, "If I had had a university education," I heard him say one day, "I should probably have entered upon the path of literature and acquired distinction therein." In 1830, Macdonald, then 15 years of age, entered upon the study of law in the office of George Mackenzie of Kingston, a close friend of his father, with whom also he lodged. In 1832, Mackenzie opened a branch office in the town of Napanee, to which MacDonald was occasionally sent to look after the business. In 1833, by an arrangement made between Mackenzie and L.P. McPherson, a relative of the MacDonalds, young MacDonald was sent to Picton to take charge of McPherson's law office during his absence from Canada. So you can appreciate he wasn't exactly in a qualified position to undertake the practice of law, having not even at this time, while running a law office, been called to the bar. On being called to the bar in 1836, MacDonald opened an office in Kingston and began the practice of law on his own account. He then had 2 lads come to him to study law. The 3 worked together for a few years, then afterwards they went into politics. The times were rough. In MacDonald's first case in the practice of law, which was at Picton, he and the opposing counsel became involved in an argument, which, waxing hotter and hotter, culminated in blows. They closed and fought in open court, to the scandal of the judge, who immediately instructed the crier to enforce order. This crier was an old man personally much attached to MacDonald, in whom he took a lively interest. In pursuance of his duty, however, he was compelled to interfere. Moving towards the combatants and circling round them, he shouted in tones, "Order in the court! Order in the court!" adding in a low but intensely sympathetic voice, as he passed near his protege, "Hit him, John!" I have heard Sir John Macdonald say that in many a parliamentary encounter of after years, he has seemed to hear, above the excitement of the occasion, the voice of the old crier whispering in his ear the words of encouragement. "Hit him, John!" Speaks to the conduct of politics that I have discussed earlier in an episode. Furthering with his success as a lawyer, it says, it's not true that he leaped at one bound into the first rank of the legal profession. On the contrary, I, this is the author, believe that his progress at the bar, although uniform and constant, was not extraordinarily rapid. It's a nice way of saying he didn't do so well. He once told me that he was unfortunate in the beginning of his career with his criminal cases, several of his clients, of whom von Schlotz was one, having been hanged. This piece of ill luck was so marked that somebody, I think it was William Henry Draper, afterwards Chief Justice, said to him jokingly one day, quote, "John A., we shall have to make you Attorney General, owing to your success in securing convictions." What's that saying? The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Now, it came later on that MacDonald had to deal with the fact of, if you might call it fake news, that was prevalent in the time. And this is pertaining to George Brown, who controlled the media. The man responsible above all others for this deplorable state of things. This was a deadlock that threatened to make government impossible in Canada. The man responsible was he who for years past had not ceased in the columns of his paper and from his place in Parliament to set one section of Canada against the other, who labored to stir up racial and religious strife, who habitually gave to the people of Upper Canada a distorted view of the national characteristics and the religious belief of their fellow countrymen in Lower Canada. The result was that the Union, formed only 23 years earlier, about which such high hopes had been entertained, was on the point of breaking up. The actual impasse which had now been reached seems to have opened George Brown's eyes to the effect of his course, and to have convinced him that the time had arrived when a cessation of the old feuds was absolutely necessary to the carrying on of the Queen's government in Canada. The Queen's government in Canada. You'll often hear me speak of or write Her Majesty's government of Canada. or in Canada. Impelled by the sense of patriotism, he now joined hands with Macdonald and Cartier for the purpose of carrying the great scheme of Confederation. Interesting choice of words, scheme. I would apply that as well to the actions of another Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, with his unilateral initiation and plotting for effecting the Constitution Act in 1982. This and this alone promised deliverance from the unhappy deadlock that impeded the progress of the country. And remember, in a previous episode I explained how this was a top-down dictated approach. This was not the people coming forward and developing their own governance. It was, in fact, said, you know, this didn't arrive from heaven. This didn't come from the people. It wasn't given to them that way. It was a benevolent dictator approach. And I contrasted that with how Indigenous governance has indeed evolved and moved forward from the people and relies on the people and connection spiritually to the land and all their relations. And one final point is that the taking over of the Northwest from the Hudson's Bay Company, a troubled chapter in the early history of the Dominion, caused Sir John Macdonald a great deal of concern. Looking back after the event, it would seem that the difficulties experienced had their origin in three main causes. First, the neglect of the Hudson's Bay Company to prepare the settlers for the great change involved in the transfer of the government of that vast region to Canada. Not land, the government, governing Her Majesty's subjects. Secondly, the lack of conciliation, tact, and prudence on the part of the Canadian surveyors who were sent into the country in the summer of 1869. And thirdly, the injudicious course pursued by MacDougall, who was sent to the Northwest as Lieutenant Governor in anticipation of the actual transfer to Canada. And the description of how MacDougall used the judges, the courts, the police to impose control by sentencing and even wanting and trying adamantly to throw Indigenous nationals into jail because they were supposed to look at the nature of the man and they were troublemakers. So his approach in the Northwest was to just gather up, first spy on by infiltrating and get reports back as to what was going on in the communities, and then targeting those quote-unquote troublemakers and removing leadership, interfering so emphatically with the continuing governance of Indigenous nations. And that's all I have to say.